Things are moving so incredibly fast that companies have to, one, make a decision, and two, not get paralyzed in the process. You can't stall out in the midst of it.
I had a guy, we talked, he was perfect for my role. He was looking and he had nothing on the table. He came in at like this great price point, and then all of a sudden, after his second interview, this is legitimate, he didn't make this up, he had 2 other offers on the table. It's like when you go to buy a house and the house has been sitting on the market for 9 months.
Welcome to Oratory. Thanks for joining us. Today's episode is a little bit different. So once a quarter, my plan is to bring the MRC team to you. And we're planning on talking about updates, recruiting tactics, and we're not planning to talk about updates or recruiting tactics, but really more to like zoom in and talk about what we're actually seeing from our clients and candidates and the market generally. So, as you know, we spend our days in conversations with leaders, operators, founders, and teams across the mining industry. And my thought is when we're that close to the work that we start seeing some patterns and things that don't always match up to what we're talking about in real time, and things that don't always make it to LinkedIn or the highlight reel, but things that really matter. So this conversation today really is about people, leadership, decision making, and teams working under pressure. So with that said, welcome the MRC team. I have Heather, Samantha, and Risa with me today. So thank you guys for joining me. This is exciting.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, thank you.
You sound thrilled. No, I'm kidding. I generally lead into the podcast with, as Risa just smiles at us, I generally lead into the podcast with like my favorite question, which is like, what's getting you excited? But I think we have a little bit different tone today. So what I'm thinking is talking about a conversation that we've had recently that stuck with us and why. And so I'm going to try to take this one to start and see if we can get our creative juices flowing and start talking about some real stuff. So, conversation that I had while attending AEMA in December was talking to a potential client, and they said, look, Lindsey, like I'm so far behind in just getting anything done with regard to recruitment. I haven't responded to any applicants that have come in. I haven't responded to LinkedIn requests. I haven't responded to referrals. I have just like let them all sit. And now I imagine that they're like irritated with me and don't want anything to do with the situation. And now I'm stuck because some of them could have been great and some of them aren't, but I don't even know what to do. So I just need somebody to offload that for me. And I feel like, getting paralyzed in indecision about hiring, about what the next steps are, about how to figure out what you should be doing in an interview process. I feel like that's probably something that's happening behind the scenes more often than not, whether you're a big company with big systems and recruiters internally or not. And so, what are you guys thinking about that? Because for me, this is like a light bulb moment. Like, this is all we do, right? So, is there anything that's coming up for you guys with regard to that kind of conversation?
I feel like a conversation that you and I have had a lot is about making sure you're planning for your recruiting process and making sure like all these people have to interview this person. So let's like make sure that we're not like backtracking and we're like, oh, we really like this guy, but we forgot that, Bob has to interview him. Oh yeah, now we have to Jim has to interview him, and then Sally in accounting wants to talk to him, and then the person ends up doing like 10 interviews and then they're totally soured by the company and the whole experience. So I feel like this relates to that in like when you are like, oh my gosh, we need someone so bad, you make a post, but you're not actually ready to invest the time into finding that person. Like it's a panic move and you're not thinking it through, and you're like, we just have to find this mine engineer right now. We post it, and then you're not like ready because you're really busy to invest the time and you're not pre-planning for that. So I feel like that relates, and that's something like we are talking about all the time of like, don't jump into it. Make sure that you have the time to invest in this process, because it does take time and it does take some effort and planning.
Well,
Yeah, for sure.
and I feel like we even see that when we're hired as recruiters, the same thing, right, Sam? They are eager to have us come in, interview people, and then the process takes forever to go through. They don't plan it. we're so busy. Okay, we want to interview this person right now, and then you don't get an interview for 2 weeks. So,
Well, and I think Heather, you're
Yeah.
really, really good about this, especially at like the onset of a search, is reminding me to ask the question like, hey, let's plan the interview process. Let's talk through this. And it doesn't mean that they adhere to it 100% of the time, but it means that we've thought through it. And I think that that's a really good point, is just like take a step back, recognize not only that you have needs for the like the people, but then what is the process that's ideal? What would you be willing to go through yourself? Because it's an investment on both ends, right? The candidate and the company are both spending time on this. But if you ask a candidate to spend, 5 interviews, and prepping and worrying and fretting and traveling or whatever, like they've invested a lot of time. And so just being mindful of everybody's input and influence, I think, is an important thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think some of the shifts, and I don't know, I guess just to back up and talk about a little bit of the decision making scenario, right? Like sometimes there is no ideal decision. Sometimes you just have to make a decision and then continue to figure out and iterate and like do it better the next time. And I think we often deal with so many individuals that are really, really technical and they want to overanalyze it. And it's like paralysis by analysis. And I think in hiring and other decisions around us all the time, we see that. Um, so, what other sorts of trends or what are you seeing shift, I guess, from last year into this year? So like we don't have to talk about like December, but let's like flash back to like a year ago and then thinking about how things changed over the course of the last 12 months. What sort of has migrated or what's feeling different about the general industry or how people are working?
I mean, I feel like things are picking up. I feel like,
Yeah.
it's interesting in our industry. We go through all of a sudden, we're doing a lot of engineering roles or we're doing, these specific roles. It goes in cycles, but I
Hmm.
really feel like things are picking up. Um, I mean, for example, how often do you get to work 3 startups?
Yeah.
That's not usual. So I
Yeah.
think that's a sign for what's happening in the industry.
I absolutely agree. And I think we've sort of been forecasting that with like Fast 41 and some of the changes of policy, but it's taken this long for it to actually hit. And I joked like probably going from 2000, so 2023 into 2024, it was kind of smooth sailing. I feel like we had really great candidates lined up with all of the jobs. Like there were plentiful individuals and just the right roles for them. And it was like this tipping point that I was nervous about because it was either going to go one direction or the other, right? And so either like we were going to see it fall off entirely and there were going to be lots and lots of people and no jobs for them, or the opposite. And I think we've started to see that happen where now things are moving so fast. And I think Sam has like a really great example of this with the process engineer that we worked with recently. But like things are moving so incredibly fast that companies have to, one, make a decision, and two, not get sort of like paralyzed in the process, because they're the people that they like today. And I think Risa has had this experience here too. But like, I think you can't stall out in the midst of it. So, Sam, I'm going to let you talk about your example where the individual had multiple offers in like no time at all.
Oh yeah, that happened. That was crazy. So I had a guy, we talked, he was perfect for my role. He was looking and he had nothing on the table. He came in at like this great price point and then all of a sudden after his second interview, he had to like this is legitimate. He didn't make this up. He had 2 other offers on the table. It's like when you go to buy a house and the house has been sitting on the market for 9 months and then you're like, oh, I'm going to get this house, no problem. And then all of a sudden, the same weekend you put an offer on it, everybody wants the house too. I feel like it's that with good candidates. And we were so excited. And I legitimately thought that we were going to lose the candidate because he was getting really high offers. And like the company we were working with just couldn't match this like giant offer. It was a much bigger company with much more benefits and things. And somehow the culture of the company won out in the end, and he still got more money than he originally came in wanting. So it was, I feel like, win-win for everyone, but it was kind of crazy how it happened because there was nothing. And all of a sudden I'm like calling, like panicked, like, I'm really sorry. I had no idea this was happening, but he's got 2 other offers on the table. So if you like him, you got to move.
Yeah. But also he did a really great job of managing that and being transparent. And I think like
Yes.
that is a great conversation to also add into this is that like often when that's happening with candidates that we're working with, they're not communicating all of the things. And really, we're here to be your sounding board and your advocate. And if it's not the best role and you're not the most excited, like we won't ever push them into a role just because we're representing it. And I think that
Yeah.
that is a really, really important thing to talk about. But we will help you make a decision and
Yeah.
help you to do the best thing possible because the worst scenario would be for him to be lackluster about the opportunity, take it anyway because he feels guilty or because you pressured him or something like that, and then leave like 3 to 6 months in. Like that doesn't do
Yeah.
anybody any favors. So I don't know. I think that that's
Well, yeah,
important.
it
But
doesn't benefit us to push them in. It
Right.
feels really yucky. And
oh
I
God,
always say this, like I was in a sorority in college and we had the recruitment process. We always said it was mutual selection. Like we're picking you, you're picking us. And now I always use that in recruiting. Like it's a mutual selection process. It is not like our grandparents where like they were fighting for the job and they would like work 7 days a week to beat the other guy out. Like this is mutual. Everyone should be happy at work because when you like what you're doing, you're going to do a better job anyways. So it's not to our benefit to push someone into a job and then 3 months later we have to replace them with someone else. And then the company's never going to use us again to put someone else in there. Like that doesn't benefit anyone.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it's
definitely
important to
short-sighted.
make sure that people understand. I like to tell people, think about it, think about these circumstances, think about where you're at. Do you really want to do this? And then get back to me. You know,
Yeah.
let's, this is my view of it. You get your view. We can meet back in the middle and have another conversation. And then we can decide if this is the best decision for you. Because,
Yeah.
I mean,
What's also really great though, I think, is when we have clients that allow us to know them, right? To know them, to know their teams, to understand their culture, to like invite us into that scenario so that we can represent them accurately, fairly, talk to candidates about what it might look like and feel like to be there on top of what they can add in, because I think all of that makes a huge difference in like how it all turns out. But Risa, you have also like kind of going back a little bit, you've had some experiences recently where there's just been like a lack of decision on candidates and then they fall off.
Absolutely, yes. It's been, pretty antagonizing with some of the candidates that haven't heard feedback within 3 weeks. Because, like Sam, like she was mentioning, like they're going to have other offers on the plate, or it's a big decision. You know, they have families, they have school, they're going through school right now. When are they going to start the start date? So there's a lot of variables in decision making.
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, let's kind of shift the conversation. I can't talk today. This has been like my problem since the new year started. I've like gotten to my desk and I'm like stumbling over all my words. Anyway, so what do you think where do you think leaders are seeming more confident versus unsure at this point, or based on the last year or so of activity?
Well, I feel like a recent client is, they say, how do we go to the finish line with finding a candidate? Whereas now, like, they're saying, how can we, attract more candidates, or how do we make it more attractive, not just attractive, but more, how can we make it better with our leadership, or not salesy, but more authentic on our end. I think that's a good example of what I've seen that's changed a little bit more, because the market isn't, we mentioned the market's pretty competitive right now, and the lack of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone's having to shift a bit, right? And say like what's in it for a candidate versus what is in it for me from this candidate for the company? And while I think that that's still a bit of a balanced point, because I think the company's always thinking that, I think that they're having to work a bit harder to get the attention to the roles out there at this point. Um, Anything else?
Well, I think we've seen this, all of us, but it's nice when we get to talk with the leadership about when they listen to us. Like, what are you seeing? What are the trends? What's happening? How can we do better based on what you know about us? Tell us where we
Yeah.
might be able to improve. Maybe we can't do it now, but maybe it's something we can do down the road. I think that's a lot different than it has been previously.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because I think that's absolutely true. I think that when we have companies that say, like, hey, what are our blind spots? Like, we've been here, we don't totally understand what the market is saying about us. Like, you're a great barometer for that. And I think it's actually really fun recon work too, because we get to have a different conversation with everybody and it gets people talking. So rather than just calling and saying, like, hey, you interested in a job, you can be like, hey, I know that you're nearby or whatever, like, what are your thoughts on this operation? And just kind of allow us to have different conversations and learn more on behalf of our client. So I think that's always kind of fun. But, I think that the level of confidence going into 2026 about the market generally seems to be quite high. Where like going into
Mhm.
2025, there was a lot of uncertainty, and it was like, are these policy changes going to happen? What's going on in the market? Where are we going to get money? And while I think people are still kind of competing pretty heavily, especially in the junior space for actual funding, I think that the confidence level across the board of like, can we get this stuff done is there. I think the unsure component that I asked about is like, where are we going to find the people? And that is a very, very real thing at this point, because especially like startups, project teams, I think they're just not there. And if we could grow them on trees, I would. Are there any questions that your clients or candidates are asking you more often?
One thing that's come up for me that I have been totally surprised by is most of the candidates I'm speaking to now are really concerned about like upward mobility in a company and staying, and which is a big change because as a millennial, like most of the last 10 years have felt like everyone was like planning to stay in a company 2, 3, 4 years and then move on. And I think the job market has been kind of rough the last couple of years and people are tired and they want to go to a company and just like plan on staying for a while. And so, well, a lot of the conversations I'm having are like, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to be job hunting again. So like, what's the possibility for me to stay and grow? And I want to be here 10 years. And that's like totally different than it's been for like, I haven't
Yeah,
had those conversations before.
I think that's a good point. I've certainly had that as well. And I mean, that could be a really nice shift, right? Because I think that using recruitment, using recruiters is a huge investment. And so if we can say like, hey, our candidate's already thinking about this, like that's a great, trajectory forward for everybody. That's
Hmm.
that's also really, really important for us to be noticing as a trend. But Heather was shaking her head. She's obviously had that same conversation too.
I just had one this morning before our call. That he said, I'm interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing me because I want to make sure this is a place where I want to be and stay. That's
Yeah,
exactly what he said.
Hmm.
that's
That's the
awesome.
same conversations I'm having. And like, I know as a millennial, I've had many conversations where people have been like, I'll stay 2 or 3 years and then I want to go back to school and get a master's, or I want to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge shift in what's happening. Like, people are tired, the economy's a little bit uncertain, and they just want to make sure they're like in a stable job. And nobody wants to be in a situation where you're like first in, first out. They want to get some
Yeah.
seniority in a company.
Well, do you guys think that this has anything to do with as much M&A activity as we've seen or layoffs or other things? Like, are these individuals that have been subject to those scenarios, or are these people that like perhaps are on the fringe that haven't experienced that? Because I think that the outlook for somebody who's been recently laid off or had a reduction in force or something like that, they might have a different perspective on security per se versus somebody who's just like kind of looking or we approach. What are your thoughts there?
I think you've had both. We've had both
Yeah.
Yeah.
scenarios. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's why we're talking to people that, want more security, but you also are still talking to people who want the experience and want to get their foot in the door or progress their career. So they're thinking down the road, well, I'm going to still do this for this long, and then my end result will be I want to be somewhere down
Yeah.
the road once I'm at a different stage in my career longer. So
Yeah.
I think you're
So
always going to have that balance.
So two things that I've been kind of
Yeah.
surprised about is one, I feel like in the past that I've seen people with major companies want to stay with major companies. And now I'm seeing lots of people from major companies say like, I thought that they were going to be my best bet, the most secure, the long-term bet, et cetera. And they're like, well, it doesn't really matter from what I'm seeing. And so
Hmm.
now we have opportunity to utilize those individuals if the skill sets are correct for smaller companies, right? And I think Risa's got a really fun story about this. We have a client who was commenting on that the other day.
Yes, no, he mentioned that he's worked with a lot of OEMs and then bigger companies, but he's found that he likes to work in OEMs, and because you wear different hats, and that you are able to, be in a not a higher position, but more of a more meaningful position where you can make a difference, not just, wearing different hats, but having that under your belt for the next project. But he's excited to be there long term.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things he said that I loved so much was he was like, I started in big companies and every company I've joined since has gotten smaller and smaller and I've had more and more fun. And like, it's really fun to work with people like that because they bring that level of enthusiasm and that same sort of sentiment. And so rather than being exclusionary in their perspective of how they look at candidates, they're like, hey, I was there too. And like, this is all the stuff that you can bring to the table. Where sometimes I think we get that sometimes unintended bias where they're like, oh my gosh, they've only been with majors. Like, how could they possibly wear lots of hats and do all the things that we're asking in a smaller company? And I think that's part of the interview experience. Sometimes that's not the right fit, but I think it's how you interview rather than just assume that they're not going to be able to fit in. But I think that we see lots and lots of assumptions across the board. And I think a little story that Heather's laughing. I think a story that Heather and I have run into is, routinely. She's worked on a lot of like more senior level roles, and especially in like startups and restarts. And there's people love to do that work. And so Heather, I'll let you take it from here.
They do. What's funny is you have people who've been CEOs, COOs, who've been VPs, and to become the manager of operations or to move into just a GM role. Um, what the clients are saying to me is why? Like, why would we talk to this person? And I said, well, they obviously understand the job, first of all, what the role is, but they want to get their hands wet again. They like being in operations. They like being boots on the ground. This is what they want. So many of them will say to me, I'm not concerned about what the salary is. I just want to be with the people.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a big trend that we've been seeing, Lindsay, at least with some of the roles that I've had.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, because I'm running into them all the time, but like one of my favorite clients, actually, he's been a client and a candidate a few times. um, he told me one time he was sort of like always in producing companies that were sizable in nature, and then somehow he wound up with a CEO role. And he goes, "Oh my God, like of a non-producing company at that." So like his role totally shifted, and this was the progression that he thought he wanted. And then he says to me like, "Oh my God, like be careful what you wish for, right? Because what I was dealing with in operations and like management and all of that stuff is like where I excelled and what I was good at and what I loved and like it was familiar." And he's like, now I'm on like the opposite end of the table, and while this is what I asked for, like I'm also the biggest target. I am the reason that things will succeed or fail. Like I will be the first one out, like and get fired, etc. And as I said, he's been a candidate and client a few times, so that's worked out in a few different ways. But when we have these conversations, it's a really enlightening situation because everybody is human at their core. And so I think that often you just realize like what gets you ticking. And I think more of the senior workforce that we get to engage with, that often at the end of their careers, they'll ask for two things. One, like board or advisory seats, or two, to get back into like the real nitty gritty of like the operations. And I'm never surprised about either. But I have really enjoyed actually seeing it. It is a little bit different of a sell to go from like CEO into like, a GM or something like that though. So I don't know. I think it's kind of fun. So moving right along, I think we've had some really, really cool clients. And while we're not going to call any of them out specifically, because I certainly did not ask for permission for that, um, our next segment, as I will call it, is innovation and interesting work. And so I want to talk about some of the cool stuff that we're seeing out in the market. Um, and so, Sam, I'm going to let you take off with this one. You can go
Me?
any direction you want, but you've seen a few of the cool ones recently. Yeah,
I
you.
have seen, I have seen a couple of the cool ones. I think so. Some of the clients that we're working with, and this has come up. There's several, so I'm not talking about any specific because we have two right now that are kind of doing the same thing. But I have always said this that mining needs like a better story. We're just not telling the proper story. I think everyone says that. But am working with clients that are going into the space of like waste, mine waste, and reprocessing it. Um, and I feel like the sale in here to the candidates is like, how cool is it that you get to, everyone has this bad image of mining, but you're taking things that are like the bad part of mining and making it better and reprocessing it and getting more stuff out of it, all while creating jobs, all while creating more resources, and it's environmentally friendly. It's like all those like classic like clicky words, green and environmental and all those things.
They're making mining sexy, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, making mining sexy. That's exactly right.
Any thoughts from you, Risa, on this?
On
I'm
mining that
picking
is
on you.
sexy.
No, well, I mean, sure, if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that.
I was just thinking, I
You were
remember.
just quiet.
um, well, I think my intake on this is that I forgot the question.
Anything that you're seeing that's like been interesting, any processes that are different that is sort of like, hey, this is cool and let's talk about it.
Well, I think silver's going up in price. I think that's very interesting. And seeing different mines wanting to be public pretty soon. I think that's pretty interesting. And then additional to that, I don't know the clients that we were talking about working with. There's just a lot of startups that I've never thought would come out that I can't say yet, but that's exciting to see, as we mentioned before. There's a lot going on in the mining industry, and it's pretty exciting for candidates to see, like, oh, I actually don't want to work at this corporation for a while, and there's a startup that's doing something that people have never thought of. But yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think in the last few years with the changes of non-competes, I think specifically like the consulting industry has really felt the effects of that. And watching some new spinouts from big companies to being small and the value propositions that they have and like what they're actually offering and that they're working within niches that they really enjoy. I think that, going to Sam's comment about like them being really excited and being able to tell a different story, I think that as we've seen some of these consulting groups spin off from the big ones, that they're passionate and that they tell a great story about what they want to do and their impact. And so while consulting or whatever these little areas may not be super exciting for everyone, like when you find what that is, the way that you tell your story, I think draws in both clients and prospective talent. And so I've really, really loved seeing individuals crop up with new companies and new ideas. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. But I was actually did a podcast earlier this week with Gabriela Castro and Beth Brody and a lady from Canamex. Her name's Karen, and we were talking about just like women in the mining industry, and so not necessarily deliberately going that direction, but I think we're all members of Women in Mining, and one of the things that we talked about were all of the female-led startups and all of the groups that are sort of like cropping up and the influence that they're making on the industry and what that really looks like. And so I think that's been really cool too. So um, we hinted on this a little earlier, but talking about sort of like that decision making and the unbiasing, I think it's really important to talk about because I think inherently we all have bias, right? And it's sort of how do we get over it? How do we figure out how to interview better? How do we figure out how to make better decisions? And so I guess the question to you guys is where do assumptions show up most when people are making hiring or leadership decisions in terms of decision making and unbiasing? Like, what would you say about that at this point?
I would say that I guess I feel like people make assumptions. The leaders look at somebody's resume and make assumptions, even though we've already had a conversation with this person and went through and made sure that this is potentially a good fit for them, and they still just go off of what their resume says. And
Yeah.
I feel like we all say this: everybody's more than their resume. So, um,
Well, and
Yeah.
how many people do you think, like, I have never actually heard anybody say, I'm great at writing my resume. Like, not one time have I heard a candidate say, like, oh, I enjoy this, or like, I've made revisions recently and I think they're really great. Like, that never happens, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that people are more than their resume. And a story that I've told forever that's like totally played out, and you guys are probably sick of me telling it, is like back in the day, we didn't get the resume. Like, I watched my dad do this for a million years, and people would call because they'd see an ad in a paper and be like, hey, I am Joe, and I saw your 3 sentence ad in like the Chicago Tribune, and I do X, Y, and Z. And my dad'd be like, oh, all excited about him. And he'd be like, I'll send you my resume via mail. And so like a week later, he gets the resume and is like, well, shit, that doesn't look as good as this guy sounded. And I think like when you just hear the story, sometimes you get excited about it versus like you see black and white and they've missed all of the nuance and all of the stuff that they get to talk about. And I think like the magic of what we get to do all the time is like marry those two together. And sometimes it still doesn't read through on the resume, but like I think there's a lot to talk about with that. So somebody else chime in.
Well, I think, but Heather touched on this earlier, is like when hiring managers assume that why would this person want this job? Like they're not qualified or they're overqualified or they're whatever, or they're moving into something else where they might be a good fit, but the hiring manager automatically is like, oh, they wouldn't really want to work here, or they're too old, they have too much experience. And we're like, we already had this conversation. They do want to work there. They do want to do this. You don't have, like, let's not assume that they wouldn't be a good fit because of whatever's on their resume.
I think my thing is they need to have conversations with people. I know
Yeah.
it's time consuming, but if you need to hire someone and you want to find the right fit, you have to have conversations with people. And we aren't vetting these people and just throwing out resumes, right? So I feel like that's the important thing. You, I mean, I actually have not forced them, but heavily suggested with Lindsay's help that, look at this person, even though they may not be from your industry, have this conversation. Um, you know, and things have worked out. I think I
Hmm.
had another role where this person was like, "How do I interview all these people? Who should I interview?" And Lindsay and I were like, "All of them." There was 13,
Yeah.
but
And she did it.
yeah, and I picked people from different industries because I felt like they needed to um, see the diversification and what each person could bring differently to the table. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to have the conversations and not just throw everybody's resume away.
Or even have the conversations with us, right? I mean, like a lot of times we'll
Yeah.
send a candidate and they'll automatically like have a like decided opinion about it and just be like, nope, none of these fit. And we have to push back and be like, no, trust me, like we've been working with you. We know what you need. We know what your company needs. Like I'm telling you, I do this for a living. Try this guy. You'll be surprised.
Uh, well, I totally get what you're saying, Sam. I think my default answer to that is like we've developed a level of trust
Yeah.
together, right? And they usually say yes, and I'm like, then I promise I understand how little time you have and that like wasting it isn't a priority for me or for this person. And so like just do like a 15-minute fit check. Just have the conversation. If you're not like, to use like very trendy language that my 15-year-old would say, like if you guys aren't vibing, then just like end the call and be like, thanks so much. But you're ultimately extending your network as well by having these conversations, right? So even if you're like, well, I don't know if this person is quite right, you can decide that they're really cool and then like run into them at a conference 6 months later and all of a sudden it's the right fit, it's the right time, they're familiar, like all of these sorts of things. And I think our industry is specifically one where there are so few people and it is so relationship based that like it never hurts just to have that call and be like, okay. And if you decide that they're, you know, not great, I was going to say something else. Um, then just don't continue it. Just be like, thanks so much for your time and move on.
Yeah.
But like, we're all professionals and it doesn't always have to work. But I always just sort of say like, hey, trust me on this one. And Heather has been really, really great about, figuring out how to get people to talk to people. So I guess a question back to us is like, how do we avoid that trap? Is there anything you guys sort of check yourself with occasionally so that you aren't like finding that you're like tossing a resume out or something like that?
Thinking about maybe transferable skills and skill
Yeah.
set, and like having that conversation is, I think, is really important. Like Heather said, there's more to the story. In the one sentence of I've worked with conveyor belts, maybe they've worked further underground or something like that,
Yeah.
and we didn't know, and they forgot to add it in their resume. And I think conversation and seeing how this can transfer to the position.
Well, Risa, I think you're the best at that. And I will attribute this to just like your youthful exuberance and unjadedness of like life and recruitment and mining. And I think that like we can certainly learn from that because like just the other day you were like, Lindsay, we should talk to this guy. And I'm like, no, he doesn't have this, that, and the other. And so I'm like this old curmudgeon occasionally thinking like, nah. That was and like you convinced me. I'm like, okay, I guess we'll figure this out, right? And so I think it's important to have those checks and balances internally as well as like externally with our clients. And so I will probably say that like for me, I have done this long enough that like I'm looking for lots of specific things and sometimes they're not hitting. And while I do get to have lots of calls and they can change my mind, I find that sometimes I have to change my piles or my folders to be like, just talk to the person. It could be way better than I think. And so that's my method. I'm like, just challenge yourself to have the conversation. It's not going to hurt. Follow the same advice I'd give to our clients.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. That's
I
how
mean,
Go
I,
ahead.
I try to, I feel like we should try to, have conversation with everybody, whether it's important, and I'll be honest with people. I'll be like, hey, I don't really think you're a good fit for this, but if you feel
Yeah.
like you are, tell me why.
Hmm.
Because just because I say that based on my knowledge of what I know, and I think it's important that we also relay back to the candidates like, this is the feedback that I'm getting. So this is why I'm telling you this and asking you these specific questions because
Yeah.
I need to know this and we need to know to make sure this is going to work for you and you can actually do that. And I always say to them, if this isn't the right job for you, at least we're having a conversation and building a relationship so that when the right thing comes along, there it is.
I
For sure. Go ahead,
think my
Risa.
favorite interview with Lindsay, in person interview, was when she said, "Have you ever thought of being a CFO?" And the candidate was like, "No."
Uh-oh. Hopefully I can find him a CFO role.
And I think we see, what they don't see too, candidates do, or even with like clients, like we see what they could be, and and with their skill set and relationship that we've had with them throughout the years, or just briefly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Risa. And I think like sometimes we typecast ourselves as candidates. We're like, well, I've always been a mine engineer, so I'm going to keep being a mine engineer. But like they also have a side business and they're really entrepreneurial. And like all of a sudden something crops up that like marries those two skill sets. And we're like, oh, well, it's the right person. Well, they might not have considered that for themselves. We already understand that like that background for them. So I don't know. I think just talking to people is probably our key message there, right?
Yeah.
Just
I
have
have
the
found,
damn conversation.
I think that like obviously we're not don't have the technical background. We just go off of like what the skills that are being required. But I usually ask a candidate like, here's what's being required of you. Do you have these experiences? Can you walk them through me? And I have found that like, I don't know, 9.5 out of 10 times people are honest about their skill set, and because they don't want to end up in a job where they do not have the technical knowledge, or even in an interview where they don't have the technical knowledge. So I feel like people don't really lie about not being qualified for a job. They will like flat out, even if I contacted them and I'm like, I have this job, they'll look at the job description and be like, no, I don't have that skill. Like, I can't do this. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I think the interesting thing to that is that like people are doing it on both sides. And so just like earlier, we were like, oh, like a client saying, why would they want to join us? Versus a candidate saying like, oh, I don't have that. Like I find that people talk themselves out of opportunities all of the time because it's change, it's unknown, it's a big scary. And I think sometimes having the conversation with both sides and saying like, here are the possibilities and you guys get to make this decision, just de-arming it a little bit is something that's necessary. And I like that part of our job where we get to
mhm.
be a mediator or sounding board or get somebody to have the confidence to pursue something or make a decision that is out of the comfort zone sometimes, and then see like really cool successes come from it. Like that's the part that I love.
Mhm.
um I had it like a train of thought that I lost in the midst of that. Um, I don't know where it is. It's gone now.
That was my
Um,
fault. Sorry.
I'm like, well, I think it was a good one too. It'll come up when we're done or something. Um, so we're at 40 minutes, so we don't have tons and tons of time left. So let's talk about belonging, trust, and teams as I throw stuff on my desk so it makes crazy noises. So what do you think helps people actually settle into teams and perform well? Because like that's the onboarding process, and often we don't get to do that. But like I think having that conversation early and preparing our clients for it and candidates for it is part of success. But that's my perspective. What about you guys?
I think, I mean, establishing what the culture is for your company and making sure that they come in with value. You don't want a guy that comes in and they don't have a computer or a desk. Just
Be ready.
yeah, just ready. At least have a fake plant in the corner. You know, just making them feel value, and introducing, to the whole team and understand the culture of it for sure is important.
Well, I think
Well,
it's
I,
important to
yeah.
potentially team people up with other people in different um, areas that they're going to work with. I mean, I try to do that as an HR manager to encourage that and arrange that with, you know, work in other departments. I mean, I'd have a nurse that may, when I was back in the day, I'd be like, okay, well, you have to at least spend some time in the kitchen because this is what we're doing. Like, it was like, it's not a lot, but I want you to see it from their perspective. So when
Yeah.
you're seeing it from your perspective, like, I just feel like it's helpful to understand the people that you're working with. So I think that helps them be a better part and create the team cohesiveness.
Huge. I feel like we need more of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sam, I didn't
I
mean
was
to
going to
cut you off.
say, no, I cut you off. I'm sorry. I was going to say that I have talked about this several times. I've had this conversation like at the Idaho Mining Conference, on LinkedIn, that culture, I think, has to be intentional and planned out. And so, like, just like we talked about at the beginning of this, is like you have to plan out your hiring process, and that includes onboarding. And then it also includes like, how are you going to train people? How are you going to get them continuing education? That like is all needs to be thought out ahead of time, because company culture doesn't just happen. You don't just put a ping pong table in the break room and think you're cool and everybody's going to love working there. It has to be intentional and thought about and like implemented
Yeah.
all the time.
I talked to a woman who was caught in like a reduction in force and had worked with the company her entire career. And so then she was like in the midst of holidays, in the midst of all of this stuff, like forced to like make a different decision, which was ultimately going to like create her entire family to relocate from where they had been, her kids to move schools. Like this was a really tumultuous life change. And she wound up getting hired with another group pretty quickly, and not that I was responsible for, but we had had some conversations, and she was like, I am so nervous because I haven't joined a new company in forever and this is a new role for them and all of these things. And she's like, is it okay if I send you my like 90-day onboarding plan? And I was like, girl, I would love to see it. Like there's so much to learn from that. But like she took the bull by the horns, figured out all of this stuff. Like whether that actually went according to plan is a very different situation, but like she was also intentional about it. And I think like sometimes if they're not giving you that direction as a candidate, you can ask for it. And I tell people all the time, especially when it's like a brand new role or the company hasn't had to hire somebody like that and they don't actually understand what this person's going to do, because we do that a lot, right? I think that like coming up with a really nice plan for 30, 60, 90-day check-ins to make sure everybody's aligned as they move forward is important. But this lady did a remarkable job. And I was like, can I save this and like blind it out? Because this is like really remarkable. And so when I have the right client, I'm going to send it to them.
Yeah.
But I think, on top of like just getting them ready, I think something that I've really talked a lot about is belonging, right? Because I think it doesn't matter what background you've come from. It doesn't matter if you're a diversity candidate. It doesn't matter if you're exactly like everybody else there. Like going in and feeling like you should be there and you're part of the team is huge. And so having individuals be prepared to have new people on board, be welcoming, like extend themselves, just like Heather said, like partnering up. I think that belonging piece is really important for retention. Anybody else? Well, it's the hot seat question. Are you guys ready? Who wants to go first? If you were leading or building a team right now, what is one thing that you think you would be paying attention to?
I'll go.
Go.
I think you have to listen to your people. It's all about the people. And if you're not listening to your people, you're not going to really know what's going on. They're the ones that are there doing all the day-to-day stuff. And make sure that everybody's working as a good team. But you have to, I've seen it so many times, even the mine that I work at, where, nobody works as a team, they work against each other. So you have to listen to your people and be honest about what's being said with yourself as a leader, about what's being said and how can you make the change or improve, or if things are great, how can I make it better? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's very important, Heather. Just kind of tag on that, having daily check-ins or weekly check-ins to make sure that even if you are up in the other executive suit, to know the lower end of roles too is really important. Like I have, CEOs going underground just so that they know what's going on, being very involved.
Samantha.
Well, so I'm working with a startup, so I kind of am like helping them build a team, and they have like very less than a dozen employees at this point. So every new hire counts and like needs to vibe and go with the thing with everything. So like what we're considering is like, yes, are the technical skills there, but how many hats can they also wear? How do they get along with everyone else? Like, how does everyone fit in with the team? Because when you are building a small team, every person matters and needs to get along. Like when you have a big company and you don't get along with someone, you can kind of blend in with someone else or like, go behind the scenes. But if you're building a small team, everybody's got to work together, and they don't all have to like love each other and be hanging out after work, but you have to be able to get along and communicate. And so I think that would be the thing that I would be focusing on is like, how does everyone communicate, and how do we strengthen those communication skills so that everybody can communicate with what they need, how they need it, like just being able to say, I'm not going to meet this deadline. That's really hard for a lot of people, and they have that like, I have to work and work and work, where, I feel like when you're building a team, the communication is like the key issue.
Well, it's the
Yeah.
way of, like the way of how others communicate, like the DISC assessment or other personality tests that are out there. Someone might be very direct, and someone might be not as direct, and kind of feeling the not getting the warm fuzzies, as they say with their boss, and being communicative on that, on how different communication can look like.
Yeah, we use the Colby, and I have loved seeing how like areas of friction happen or where they arise, and just like how somebody is, inclined to do something one way or versus like another. And I think it's a really powerful tool. So I really like the Colby for that. I think, we talk about interviewing sort of being like dating, right? And sometimes it's like speed dating because you're getting married far before you would in a dating scenario. Like you're making a hire and like that happens really quickly. And so I love the Colby for helping like cut to the quick of how things could work or not work together. But the thing that I am consistently reminded of, both with us as a team, with the people that we get to represent as clients and candidates, is that like several years ago when I took over, I was like really tired all of the time. And like I just found that there were occasions where I didn't want to answer the phone or talk to a client or talk to somebody that was potentially on our team. And I was like, I have to change this. And I worked with a coach. And, when my dad started the company, it was like, we said, yes, we're consultants. We say, yes, we figure it out. We solve the problem, we move on. But I found that like through the coaching experience that I had and like what I wanted to do a little bit differently was that like saying no sometimes is more powerful, and saying and aligning yourself with great people is part of it. And so listening to that voice that says like, yes, take this role with this company, bring on a new person. However, I'm looking at this, because I'm sort of seeing it in three different lights. I call it the no asshole rule. And I don't want to work with them. I don't want to employ them. I don't want to be employed by them. Like, so I call it the no asshole rule. And that's a whole lot of stuff into one. But like, that's the one thing that I'm constantly paying attention to is like, if you're interviewing someone and they might be like brilliant and all of the things, but like, if you don't want to go to lunch with them or answer their phone call, like, don't hire them. It's not going to get any better. So that's my rule. So I'm glad none of you are assholes.
So are we, or we wouldn't be here.
Yeah. I'm like,
It's a
well,
good
how do
indication,
We make
Lindsay.
it
We're all
tough.
here.
small team? Apparently, I've
Like
got
the
a low
gas
threshold.
symbol. Just kidding.
My threshold for assholeness has resulted in four of us working together.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm grateful for all of you, but it's like a really important thing, because like, why would you subject yourself to torture every single day? So, I have the fortune of not having to do that. So I'm quite grateful. Anything else that we should talk about as it pertains to our subject of recruiting but not recruiting, and leadership and decision making? No words of wisdom?
Lindsay, I just wanted to touch back on the Colby.
Yeah,
The Colby really is about helping each other work together better and learn their strengths. So if your strength is this, how do we utilize that strength to work better with this person? Um,
yeah,
it's not a end all. You don't hire this person. You don't fire this
yeah,
person. It's how do we make our team work better off of their strengths and they can
yeah.
work together. That's why I was going to say, Sam, maybe you should consider having team do a Colby to see where everybody fits.
I think we have asked
Well,
them, right?
also, I
Mm.
think so. Yeah, I don't think we've done it yet with them.
But
I,
that's what it to me it's about. It's about there's no right or wrong. It's just because that's how a person is. They're never going to change. This is how they are. Let's figure out how we work together. You make that
yeah,
investment, and it's important because then you work off their strengths.
yeah.
I was
Well,
literally just going
also,
to say
there's a
that. It's
really
not
cool
right or
part.
wrong. It's just different.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we don't call it a selection tool, right? So it's just information to manage with. And so, um, you know, Heather, we've all done them here, and so like you can compare yourself to another person, see all this stuff, but you can also do like the team report, which is really cool in terms of like checking all of the boxes off and seeing if you have like a well
That I
balanced
keep
team,
forgetting to
which
do.
which I think is super super cool. So anyway, we could geek out about that forever, but um, you
That should be
know,
our next topic.
we could totally do one on Colby. I think that's a great idea. Because I think there's lots of questions about it. Lots of people don't know about it, but I think it's like such an important thing. Like I said, if we're going to speed date people, we might as well get all of the information we can and then figure out how to deal with each other long term.
Well, and I think on that note, but it's important because big organizations are utilizing that tool to make their teams better. You know, they're
Yeah.
investing, and it does take some time if you're going to go through the whole process of doing, you know, a certain amount of group of people, and then, and sometimes, unfortunately, the leader that has asked for this realizes they're not in the right role. But
Yeah.
that's the reality of what it is, and they have to accept that. And sometimes
Yeah.
when you know that, it's such a weight off of your shoulders because it's like, okay, this is how I work, and then I know where I am strong, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you know, big companies are investing in that to make their teams better. So I think it's, you know, there's plenty of people that are you know, saying all the good things about it. It's been
So
around for a
I
while.
like as we're just going down a rabbit hole, did any of you find any of your results from the Colby surprising? Or were you
Yes.
like aligned? You found it surprising? Okay, tell me why.
Well, I don't have it up, so but I just remember that I forgot the language of what that Colby test used, and I talked to Heather about it. I thought I was because I always say I'm very competitive, but I'm actually not.
Okay.
It's more of I'm more teamwork focused than competitive. So I guess I can't use I'm competitive all the time and more teamwork focused. And what was the language again? I have to pull up. But that would be fun. Maybe we should do a podcast of our personality Colby test so we can just ice break.
Yeah, I like it.
You know, it's funny because like and I think Lindsay's called me out on this, but like I'm a nine, I think, in fact finder. Like
Yes,
I'm
yes.
way up there, and Lindsay said this before. Sometimes Heather gets too deep into it because she feels like she knows like what this role really needs, and I have to pull her back and be like, "Hey,
I'm like, hey, look at the other pile.
let's look at it from this side," and I have to go, "Okay."
Well, I thought it was really funny. So like Heather and I have done the comparison for us, and like I knew I was crazy. Like none of the results on mine were really surprising to me at all. Like I was like, man, I can own all of those situations. And then we compared it, so her and I, and like I'm sort of like medium on fact finding. She's like really high on fact finding, like and processing things. And I like my follow through or what
Hmm.
like you've got like a quick start follow through.
Yeah.
My follow through is like kind of low. And so I'm like, listen, I am a great brainstormer. I'm a great starter. I'm a great like in all of these other areas. But like Heather takes it to the next level and like sinks in, does all the shit, and then like makes it happen. And so she and I tend to work together really, really well on stuff because I can start it and then she carries it through where my like end game is weak. And so, yeah, I need like that
But
constant variance and like throw something weird at me.
anyway, it's just very interesting. But
It's
you know, I want
it's
to tell
really
you when
interesting.
I did the Colby, the first initial to get my um, certification, they let you guess what you think your spouse is, and then they have your spouse take it. And when I got my husband's back, I was like, "What?" We were like one number off on two of them, and that's it.
Really?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Otherwise, we
Well, I
were. It was
remember.
like identical, and I was like, "Well, no wonder we can't get shit done."
I love that. Well, so I thought when my dad took it and that we did the comparison that we would have like levels of like crazy friction on like certain ones because I thought we were very different and like the same thing. And I was like, fuck,
Oh
we're the
shit!
same. And
Now I know
so
where I get
I,
my craziness from.
yeah,
That's why there's
I was like,
friction.
damn it, the apple doesn't fall far. Yeah. Well, no, there wasn't any friction. And I was like totally shocked about that because like literally I would say one thing, he would say another. And like even at meetings, and people would think it was like hilarious. Well, I'm like kicking him under the table for being insane. And, like I'm trying to like fact find and run meetings and do stuff. And he's like, talking about politics or something crazy. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, we're at a client meeting, get it under wraps, mister. And so, yeah, but our Colbys were apparently no levels of friction. So maybe it was all just personal, but it was great fun. I made Casey take it. And so Casey's my husband, for those of you who don't know. And he would die if I was admitting. I'm not going to tell him I'm telling you guys this. So he's an engineer, like all of the engineers. So he has like a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, a master's in electrical, and a PhD in some shit that I don't even know what it is, and lasers and fluid dynamics and stuff like that. So like super engineer. And he takes the Colby because I don't. Oh, I was doing something for him. So I
Yeah.
was like, take the Colby. I want you to do this. And so he calls me up from work, and he's like, it told me I was risk adverse. That's no surprise to me. You're a fucking engineer. And like the fact finder was really high, all these things. And he was like, I'm not risk adverse. He was so upset about being like declared as risk adverse as part of his write up. And he was like, I was like, listen, personally, you may not find yourself risk adverse. Like you'll jump off a bridge and do all kinds of dumb stuff, but that's like, what you do. But like in work, you are trained to like find flaws in systems and figure out ways to like perfect them and do all this stuff. So like risk adverse is no big deal, dude. And he was just like, I can't believe it. So like he is determined that he's going to beat the Colby and retake it and get it to tell him that he's not risk adverse. So this is like my husband's real life mission. So
And I'm
I
not
think
going
it's,
to change it unless
I know. I've told him that. I was like, unless you actually just
Right.
answer wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
reminds
anyway,
me,
this
be
is,
like,
I
I'm not
did
that
call
way.
my mom on one of the
yeah.
questions. I told Heather that. I was like, what am I?
There were a few questions I remember taking it where I was like, there was like three, and I was like, I'm like conflicted about how I really want to answer this. Like I want to be good at that, but I know I'm not. And so I had to go with like what I really like adhered to.
And this year they changed the similar type of questions, but they changed some of them. And then they also changed it so like that the report isn't so long; it's shorter. So
I noticed that when
yeah.
we got theirs, I was like, where's all of the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty? I
Well,
like
they
all of
tried to
this stuff.
refine it so it would make
Like an
a little more
executive report.
sense for people.
Yeah. That
Um,
weren't certified.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
I like it. Anyway, well, we've gone down a
I
whole
know.
different wormhole,
Sorry.
and now it's like an hour.
Sorry.
That
That's
was my
fine.
fault. I'm sorry.
I don't know that I've ever filmed a podcast that was not like going in 1,000 different directions all at once. So I think we're fine. But I guess yeah, that's that, folks. So we're planning on doing these quarterly. Who knows what we might talk about, but you should join us again. And if you actually like our rambling craziness, you should like it. If not, then just don't listen anymore. I don't care. You can find us and subscribe on all of the usual places, so like Apple, Spotify, I don't know, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the places. And I think the reason we wanted to share this is like building teams is really hard, and it is a moving target, and it's an iterative process. And so don't feel like you have to know exactly what the end game is going to be. We find all of the time that there are companies and groups of teams that are highly, highly successful by doing all the things that we talked about, communicating, listening to one another, taking Colby's, like challenging the norm. All of that stuff is so impactful. So if we can be helpful in any way, please let us know. We like to talk about all kinds of crazy stuff, but just thinking about having these conversations changes how we work, how we think, how we advise, and how we show up as partners for all of our clients. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you, team, for being here and not being assholes. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys next time.